"Why is that old man walking like a broken robot?" a child asked aloud. People laughed softly. Some looked away. Others just moved ahead in line. He didn't answer. He never did. But when a TSA officer saw him trembling, clutching his thigh, he bent down and what he saw beneath those faded khakis stopped him cold. It wasn't a limp. It wasn't age. It was a war wound, sealed in steel, and within seconds, the entire terminal fell quiet. Welcome to Grateful Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. O'Hare International was already awake before the sun cracked the skyline. The big boards flickered with departure times. Loudspeakers droned out gate changes. Rolling luggage echoed like distant thunder. But near the end of Terminal 2 in the calmer rows near the assistant's desk, an old man stood quietly in line. He wasn't tall, nor especially frail, but his back had bent with time. His steps were deliberate. His left leg barely seemed to lift. Every few seconds, he had to stop and steady himself, shifting his weight gently before trying again. The man's coat was tan, military style but old, softened at the shoulders by use. He wore a plain ball cap with no insignia, no flag. His ticket was folded neatly in a shirt pocket. When it was finally his turn, he stepped forward and cleared his throat. "Excuse me," he said softly to the young woman at the counter. "Do you still have priority boarding for veterans?" She barely glanced up. Her fingers didn't stop typing. "Yep, sir," she replied, "but only with VA disability documentation or official assistance classification. Do you have either?" He hesitated, not long, just long enough for her to glance at him more fully. His eyes were clear, tired, but he wasn't confused. "No," he said. "No, ma'am, I don't have papers." "Then I'm afraid it'll be Group D for general boarding," she said, already moving to the next task. "You're welcome to wait right over there." He nodded once, not offended. He stepped aside, then slowly made his way to the nearest empty seat. It took longer than anyone around him seemed to notice. 30 minutes passed. Children played near the windows, shouting about planes and luggage carts. Businessmen with earbuds spoke into the air as they paced. A woman in gym clothes swiped through something on her phone, frowning. None of them noticed the old man. He sat with his hands resting on his knees, watching nothing in particular. Every so often, he adjusted his left leg with the palm of his hand, easing the weight on it. The motion was subtle, practiced. A little boy, maybe 5 or 6, stopped nearby and pointed. "Mom," he said, too loudly. "Why's that old guy walking like a robot?" His mother pulled him close, whispered something sharp, and ushered him away. But even as they walked off, she looked back. Her expression wasn't unkind, but it wasn't curious either, just indifferent. The man had learned to expect that kind of look. He didn't resent it. In a quieter corner of his mind, another airport came back to him, this one not American. The heat had been different there, not the dry chill of Chicago, but a wet, pressing heat that clung to the skin. He'd been younger then, still in his 20s, back when his left leg still existed. He had been a logistics driver, stationed near the border between Quang Tri and Thuy Thien in 1972. His job wasn't to fight. He brought food, fuel, mail. But war doesn't discriminate. On the 8th day of what was supposed to be a 3-day hold, he was driving a loaded supply truck toward an isolated command point. He never made it. A mortar round hit 20 yards off course, just far enough not to kill, but close enough to bury half the cab in burning metal and dust. They pulled 3 men out alive that day. One of them was him. When he woke up, he no longer had a left leg, not even the thigh, just bandages, a phantom pain, and the knowledge that he'd stayed conscious long enough to cut one soldier loose before blacking out. The military offered him full disability classification. He said no. His reason had never changed. It wasn't pride exactly, and it wasn't shame. He just never liked being seen differently, never liked being asked. What happened, never liked answering. He didn't wear medals, didn't join groups. He'd returned to Missouri, built a quiet life fixing lawnmowers and tractors, and made peace with silence. He'd gotten a high-performance prosthetic years ago. Not the flashy kind with exposed mechanics, but a dense alloy cord unit meant for balance over beauty. The kind that soldiers rehabbed with, when appearance wasn't the priority. It served him well enough. But winters were hard. Long walks were harder. Airports were the hardest. The gate announcement chirped to life. Now boarding Group A. Group A, please proceed to Gate 32. We'll be boarding front to back by groups. Group B, be ready. The man leaned forward and slowly began to gather himself. He checked his boarding pass again. Group D, he still had time. His hand trembled slightly as he zipped his coat. Not far away, a TSA agent leaned against a podium near the conveyor scanners. He had short, dark hair and a visible shoulder holster, standard issue. His nameplate read, Carter. He wasn't watching the old man. Not yet. Just the usual flood of passengers getting ready to funnel through. But something, in a few minutes, would draw his eyes there. For now, the old man waited. He looked out the wide airport windows, blinking into the winter sky. Snow hadn't started yet, but it would. The horizon was low and gray. He remembered that kind of sky from another December, long ago, in a place where the cold didn't come from weather, but from silence. The kind after a bombing. The kind where no one spoke, because someone might still be under the rubble. He wasn't remembering to mourn. He didn't dwell. It was just part of the rhythm. Airports had a way of stirring things loose. He rubbed his thigh again, a little harder this time. Someone sneezed. A backpack rolled by on squeaky wheels. A gate agent called for standby passengers. Everything continued as it always did, and the man remained in his chair, not expecting anything from anyone. Not attention, not thanks, not recognition, just a boarding group. Just enough time to stand and enough space to move without knocking someone over. He looked down at his left hand, which still bore the shadow of an old burn scar, hidden in part by age spots. That hand had once held the shoulder of a young soldier, barely breathing, pulling him from wreckage. No one in the terminal knew that, but he remembered, and for now, that was enough. Now boarding Group B. Group B passengers may proceed to Gate 32. The voice over the loudspeaker was flat, efficient, and entirely uninterested in who heard it. The gate area responded instantly. Backpacks were swung onto shoulders. Suitcases rolled into place like obedient dogs. People stood, shuffled, and merged into a loose wave. It wasn't chaos exactly, but it wasn't far from it either. The old man stayed seated. He waited as Group C was called, then Group C2. It was always strange to him how the boarding groups had grown over the years. When he used to fly, it was row numbers and courtesy. Now it was classes, zones, memberships, algorithms. Everyone seemed in a rush, yet no one looked like they knew why. He shifted his coat on, zipped it halfway, and checked his boarding pass again. Group D. The crowd was beginning to thicken near the entrance ramp. He waited another beat, letting the crush thin slightly, then stood up. The motion was slow, carefully executed. His right hand gripped the metal handle of his roller bag. His left hand pressed against the armrest for leverage. As he straightened, his left leg didn't quite catch. His weight sagged briefly, but he corrected before anyone could notice. Except someone did. A woman sitting near the charging station glanced up, saw him pause, and looked away again just as quickly. Her fingers returned to her phone. The old man took his first step. He moved toward the gate. Each motion was deliberate. His right leg bore the load. The left dragged just a little less a step, more a guided swing. The bag behind him bumped slightly with each pull. A small sound, but in the wrong rhythm. The boarding line tightened behind him. Someone exhaled loudly. Another man behind that voice shifted from one foot to the other. Jesus, a younger voice muttered. Is he going to walk all the way like that? The old man didn't turn. His eyes stayed forward. His breathing had slowed, concentrated. He felt the familiar sting rising along the socket of his hip. But he didn't reach down. Not yet. He passed a family of 4 trying to rearrange luggage. One of the kids tugged at a juice pouch while watching him. A few steps ahead, a gate agent leaned toward her mic and spoke into her headset. "We've got a Group D passenger moving slow. Elderly. He's backing things up. Do you want us to pull from Group E instead?" There was a pause. She nodded, then clicked her radio again. "Okay, Group E, you're welcome to begin boarding alongside Group D. Please form a second line." The man didn't hear the call, but he noticed the sudden rush of people flowing around him, merging past his right shoulder, fast and eager to move ahead. A young woman clipped his arm slightly as she passed. Not hard, not intentionally, but she didn't slow down or glance back. The man grunted softly, steadied his step, and continued on. The crowd grew louder. Flight attendants moved with program grace, scanning tickets, checking ID tags. No one looked toward the man struggling 10 feet away. No one offered a hand. A TSA agent near the security belt looked over. He was a tall man, mid-30s, with a sharp crew cut and eyes that had seen things others missed. His nameplate said Carter. He watched the way the old man moved, not just slow, but stiff and locked in the pelvis. Not like arthritis, not like age, something else. Carter stepped away from his podium and made his way along the side rail, discreet but focused. The old man was halfway to the scanner now. His grip on the suitcase handle had tightened. His fingers had gone pale from pressure. He couldn't hide the wince anymore. He reached up with his free hand and pressed it firmly into the side of his hip. He hoped no one saw, but it was becoming harder to mask. He felt a bead of sweat run down his temple. His jaw clenched, but he kept walking. Behind him, a new passenger entered the line and whispered to his wife, "Why don't they just get a wheelchair for guys like that?" The wife shrugged. "He's not in one, so maybe he doesn't want it." No, but still someone should do something. Neither of them moved. Ahead, the gate agent smiled politely at the next traveler, scanned a boarding pass, and gestured toward the plane's door. "Enjoy your flight." Carter was now close enough to see the man's face. It wasn't fear, there wasn't confusion either. Just the rigid calm of someone who had long ago decided that if he fell, he'd fall standing. The agent stepped forward, careful not to startle him. "Sir," Carter said gently, just loud enough to be heard. "Would you like some help?" The old man paused. His hand stayed locked on his hip. His eyes flicked to Carter, then back to the walkway ahead. "No," he said simply. Carter nodded once, but he didn't walk away. Instead, he turned and signaled toward a nearby staff member, then leaned into his radio. "Gate 32. I need a discreet assist. Possible combat prosthetic. Requesting silent wheelchair dispatch. Veteran. Full left side support." The old man was still moving. Another few steps. Slower now. His legs shook slightly. The corner of his jaw twitched, but he was nearly at the scanner. Behind him, a new round of passengers funneled in. Most kept their distance. One or two peered around him, checking their watches. The man at the scanner looked up from his post and gave a brief, tight smile. It was the look of someone who didn't quite know how to help and hoped he wouldn't have to. Then it happened. The man stopped walking. Just for a moment. He didn't sit, didn't collapse, but his knees buckled half an inch before catching. He pressed both hands into the handle of his bag to stabilize. No one touched him, but now more eyes were watching. Carter stepped up again, slower this time. He didn't place a hand on the old man. Instead, he lowered his voice and stood at his side. "Sir," he said again, "it's all right. Help is on the way." There was no argument from the old man, but he didn't nod either. His breath came shallow now. He adjusted his weight again, trying to buy another few steps. Behind them, the quiet ripple of attention was growing. The same people who had moved past him before, some of them were looking back now. Their faces were still unsure, caught between impatience and uncertainty. But no one spoke, and the man kept his eyes forward. A minute later, a uniformed staff member appeared, pushing a standard black wheelchair. She didn't announce anything. She didn't point. She simply approached Carter and waited. He gave a silent nod. Then he turned to the old man one last time. "Sir," he said softly, "it's here. If you want it." The man looked at the chair, then at Carter. There was no shame in his eyes, just calculation, the same kind he once used to judge terrain or distance in another life. He didn't answer. He just reached down and gently placed his hand on the armrest and sat. The wheelchair rolled quietly beside him. The woman pushing it didn't speak. She simply stopped a few feet ahead and waited, letting the moment settle without pressure. Carter stood still, his body angled protectively toward the old man, not like a barrier, but like someone holding space. His gaze never left the man's face. There was no commotion, no announcement, just the low murmur of conversations tapering off as people noticed something was different. The man sat slowly. He gripped the armrest and lowered himself into the seat with deliberate care, wincing only slightly. Once down, he adjusted the angle of his left leg with one hand. That small movement told Carter everything he needed to know. It wasn't age making him slow. It was pain. Deep, steady pain, the kind you stop complaining about after the first decade, because no one can do anything about it anyway. Carter crouched to one knee, not out of obligation, out of respect. The man glanced at him, surprised. Carter didn't break eye contact. He gestured gently toward the leg. "Sir," he asked quietly, "if I may, were you military?" The man hesitated, then gave a faint nod. "Long time ago," he said. "Vietnam." Carter swallowed. His voice lowered further. "If it's all right to ask, where did you serve?" The man's gaze drifted over Carter's shoulder, as if looking down a hallway that only he could see. He wasn't the kind of man to tell stories. He didn't volunteer details. But there was something in Carter's tone, not curious, not performative, just honest. So he spoke. "Quang Tri," he said. "72. Hill Outpost went dark. We were hauling ammo up to Command Bunker 4 when the perimeter gave." He paused. "There were 5 of us. Only 3 came back." He tapped once on the side of his thigh. "Lost it right about there." Carter didn't ask more. He didn't offer platitudes or shake the man's hand. He just nodded once, deeply. "I understand," he said. But what he meant was more than that. He understood because his father had served in Fallujah, had come home with a similar leg medal, matte black, built to last but not to show. Carter had watched his dad walk with the same careful swing, had watched him ignore offers for help until the very end. This man was made of the same cloth. The TSA line had slowed. People noticed, but didn't know what they were witnessing. The woman with the charging cord from earlier stood frozen, her phone dimming in her hand. A businessman had taken off one earbud. Even the child who'd asked about the robot man now watched from behind his mother's leg. Eyes wide, Carter rose to his feet. He adjusted his stance, pulled out his radio again. "Gate 32, he said, voice level. Veteran confirmed. Full left side combat prosthesis. Requesting immediate reprioritization for seating." The reply crackled through copy that. A second agent arrived. She wore the same uniform but carried herself differently. She didn't approach the old man directly. Instead, she turned to the boarding line and began calmly rerouting people. "Please step back for just a moment," she said. "We'll resume boarding shortly." There was no pushback. Something about the way she said it, firm but respectful, left no room for argument. The line moved aside, and then it happened, without fanfare, without music, without anyone saying a word. The passengers in line slowly made space, clearing a gentle path from where the wheelchair sat to the boarding gate. Some stepped backward, others shifted to the far side. No one told them to do it. They just did. The man didn't look around. His eyes stayed forward, but he felt it. A boy, maybe 7, stepped forward from the side. He walked up, unsure, and reached out to touch the man's jacket sleeve. His fingers brushed lightly, like he wanted to confirm the man was real. The old man turned his head slightly. He gave the boy a quiet smile, then looked up at the mother, who simply nodded and whispered, "Thank you, sir." The boy stepped back, his eyes still wide. Behind them, a man in his 40s straightened his back. He wasn't military, didn't know protocol, but something about the moment pulled him into place. He raised his right hand to his brow and held it there, a clumsy salute, but earnest. Carter saw it and said nothing. Another traveler, older, mirrored the gesture. His arm snapped up sharper. His expression was tight, one by one. Others joined, not many, but enough. A pattern formed in silence. The agent behind the counter moved to open the gate door. A flight attendant at the entryway stepped aside, gesturing the man forward. Carter looked down at the chair, then back at the man. "If you'd like, sir," he offered, "I'll take you up myself." The man didn't speak. He gave a quiet nod. Carter moved behind the wheelchair and began to push, not quickly, not ceremoniously, just steady, like he'd done it before. The crowd watched. They didn't clap, they didn't cheer, but they stood still. And that stillness, in a place designed for movement, meant more than noise ever could. As the man passed the scanner, the TSA employee there snapped to attention. No words exchanged, just a small, solemn gesture, a single nod of acknowledgement. The man nodded back. It was enough. At the mouth of the jet bridge, the light was brighter. Fluorescent panels cast long shadows behind them. Carter slowed near the threshold, giving the man time to breathe. "Do you need anything else, or sir?" he asked. The old man shook his head. "You've done plenty." Carter extended a hand, not for a shake, but to press gently against the man's shoulder. "Welcome home," he said softly. The man didn't respond, but his hand gripped the armrest slightly tighter, just for a second, and then he let go. He rose from the chair slowly, not with ease, but with control. He took his bag handle, straightened his coat, and walked forward with that same quiet precision he'd shown all morning. One step at a time. Drag swing, drag swing. The rhythm never changed. Carter stood back, watching, his hands at his sides, shoulders square. He didn't salute. He didn't need to. He just stood there, holding the silence as long as it would stay. The wheelchair moved with no sound but the soft hum of its wheels on tile. Passengers stepped aside without prompting. Some lowered their heads. Others simply watched. No phones were raised. No one whispered or reached for applause. It wasn't reverence in the dramatic sense. It was something quieter, more human. Carter kept both hands on the chair's handles. He didn't speak as he guided it forward. The old man didn't speak either. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It felt earned. Near the gate, a flight attendant with silver hair in a neat uniform stepped out from behind the counter. She didn't ask questions. She glanced at the boarding list, scanned his seat, and nodded. "I've moved you to 2A, she said simply. "First row, extra legroom." The old man gave her a look, not grateful, not surprised. Just one of those long, acknowledging looks only older people give. The kind that says you didn't have to, but you understood anyway. He reached down to retrieve his small carry-on. Carter moved to assist, but the man waved him off gently. He still preferred to lift his own burdens, even if they came in new forms. As they reached the threshold of the jet bridge, Carter slowed. He could have gone further, could have walked the man all the way to his seat, but some lines don't need crossing. Some farewells are cleaner when left unspoken. He eased the chair to a stop and stepped to the side. The old man stood again, this time with effort, but less hesitation. He adjusted his coat with one hand, then offered the smallest nod in Carter's direction. It wasn't a goodbye. It was more like mission complete. Carter returned the gesture. Then, without fully realizing why, his hand moved to the badge clipped on his chest right beside it. A pin, faded, brushed steel, his father's unit insignia. He touched it briefly, grounding himself. The old man entered the bridge, His steps drag, swing, pause remained unchanged. But now they felt different. Not heavy, not struggling, just deliberate. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. Inside the plane, the attendant met him halfway. She didn't offer assistance with his bag. She simply pointed to the open space beside seat 2A. He sat down slowly, adjusted his coat once more, and placed the bag under his seat. Then he looked out the window. The wings stretched toward a sky half covered in cloud. The light was still cold, still gray, but it was clear enough to take off. Back at the gate, Carter hadn't moved. The crowd had thinned. The next group of passengers were still waiting to be called. But for the moment, things were still. He exhaled through his nose, stepped back from the glass, and glanced at his watch. He wasn't due for break. He didn't care. He stood near the window just long enough to see the aircraft begin its pushback. The fuselage shimmered slightly in the distance, heat from the engines rising off the tarmac. For a moment, something stirred in his chest. Not pride, not sadness, just stillness. He thought of his father again, thought of the morning they'd gone fishing, and the quiet way his dad had once said, "You don't always have to be the loudest to be the strongest." Carter hadn't understood it then. Now he did, on board. The old man closed his eyes briefly as the engine's hum deepened. It was a sound he had known for decades. The sound of departure, the sound of movement, the sound of not looking back. The seat next to him was empty. Across the aisle, a woman reading a novel glanced at him once, then back to her page. A toddler behind him kicked the seat once, then fell asleep. Life went on, unaware, and that was fine. He thought of the rehab center again, of the metal bars he gripped every morning, drenched in sweat by 9 a.m., of the pale linoleum floors and the scent of rubbing alcohol. Most of all, he remembered the way people watched him struggle. Not with cruelty, but with that same quiet distance people always kept from pain they didn't understand. His roommate back then had been a younger man, lost an arm, not a leg. They rarely talked. But on one particularly bad day, when he'd collapsed twice trying to reach the end of the parallel bars, the younger man had asked, "Why don't you just take the chair?" "Man," he remembered his own answer. "Even now, because I'm not done learning how to carry what's left." He never did request a wheelchair after that. He learned to walk with the prosthetic, learned to climb stairs, open doors, kneel at least halfway. There were days he regretted it, nights where his hip socket throbbed so hard he could barely sleep. But every time he stood, something inside him stayed intact. And that had always been enough. The aircraft pulled back from the terminal. The lights dimmed. The attendant passed through with one last check. She leaned toward the flight deck and said something into a small radio. "Veteran secured, all passengers ready." Then she stepped back, clipped in, and the intercom came alive. "Cabin crew, prepare for takeoff." The engines roared, steady and rising. Outside the window, the runway stretched long and flat, framed by wet grass and streaks of melting frost. The plane moved forward, slow at first, then faster, faster still, until the ground fell away beneath them, and the aircraft lifted into the air. He looked out the window one last time, not for sentiment, just to witness it. The cloud line passed, then the sky opened a cold blue, wide and weightless. The light hit his jacket sleeve, warming the fabric, and for a moment, he didn't feel the dull pressure in his side, just a quiet, expansive calm. Back at the gate, Carter finally turned. He walked away slowly, heading toward the staff break room. He didn't say anything to the others, didn't report what he'd seen. There was nothing to report. Some stories don't need to be recorded. They only need to be remembered.